My husband joined the military back in 2012, and we got our first station in 2013. Shortly after working out at the military base gym, I started to notice this creepy dude was active duty and would always show up at the same time I did, and he would just stare at me and smile. He was tall, athletic build, balding a bit, nerdy, and I would guess maybe in his 30s. I personally was in my early 20s at the time, and he ended up approaching me a few times trying to make small talk, but I told him how my husband was the one active duty, hoping that he'd get the hint. I realized that I never asked this guy's name, and he never gave it to me, and I didn't care to know because he creeped me out. This later turned out to be a mistake, and you'll see why. After 8 long years of going to this gym, the dude was still there every day staring at me. I was a personal trainer and left my business cards at the front desk of the gym. This is important for later. And after my husband ended his enlistment, we decided to stay in the state instead of moving back to our hometown. We found a rental house in the next town over and were so excited to start our civilian life. My husband was told that he'd be starting night shifts as a contractor for IT work, and I wanted to follow the same schedule so we wouldn't have issues with sleep. I ended up converting our living room into an awesome gym, complete with commercial equipment. This allowed me to work at night from home and train personal clients privately, kind of like a training studio. And I was tired of giving gyms a portion of my paycheck while working for them. And during this time, our schedule was as follows. My husband would leave for work at 11 p.m. and work until 7 a.m. We'd stay awake while I trained clients at home from 5 a.m. to noon and then go to bed at around 2 p.m. and sleep until around 9 p.m. I was signed up through a company called Find Your Trainer, where clients could find trainers online in their area, and the company would schedule them for sessions with me, and they would prepay through the website, and it was essentially a scheduling service. One day, my phone chimed with an email saying that I had a new client scheduled for Wednesday who had purchased 6 sessions. I was excited to be making some money and watching my business grow, and when the time came for the client to show up, I was nervous but overall excited. The doorbell rang, and what do you know? It was him. Because he had signed up through Find Your Trainer and not directly with me, I had no choice but to train him. I hoped that it wouldn't be too awkward, but I couldn't understand why he was willing to pay me $63 per session when he was clearly in shape and knew what he was doing at the gym. I started the first session with an arm workout, but I felt like I was wasting my time. It was obvious that he already knew how to work out, and that irritated me. I got into training to help people who actually needed assistance in transforming their health and body, and the whole session was awkward, and at one point he commented on how nice I looked that day, and I forced a smile and said thank you. For the next session, I planned to train him on back day, and as I demonstrated a lat pull down to his 6'3" body, while me being only 5'0" myself, I felt self-conscious and just wanted to get it over with. Then he told me I was doing it wrong and asked if he could show me. I was offended, considering I was the trainer in this situation, but I tried to remain professional. As I began to get up from the bench so he could correct me, he swooped in behind me and reached around to grab the handle above. But on the way to the handle, he grabbed my boob. I quickly jumped up and told him that was inappropriate and that the session was over. And that night, I texted him, saying I needed to terminate his sessions due to inappropriate behavior, and he simply responded that he understood. About 3 days later, I was up at 3 a.m. reading a book in my muumuu when I heard a noise outside. I froze and my heart began racing. Surely not. I didn't own a gun at the time and I didn't have a dog, just a parrot that liked to cuss everyone out and 2 cats. I got up and peeked through the blinds and saw a man's foot disappearing around the corner as our shed flew open. I freaked out, grabbed a butcher knife and called 911, telling them that someone was trying to break into our house. The cops arrived and searched the property but couldn't find the suspect. Several of my husband's tools had been stolen from the shed, and I filed a report and asked the police to contact the HOA to check the security cameras to see who had entered the neighborhood that night. A few days later, the police called me back with an update. They had spoken with the HOA, and as it turned out, their cameras were decoys. And that evening, we went to Walmart, and as I was entering, I saw my former client leaving. He glared at me. I couldn't help but think that it wasn't a coincidence. I had gotten rid of him without a refund, and now my husband's tools had been stolen. Surely it was him seeking revenge. The following week, my husband took me to buy my first gun and a German Shepherd. And now, it's 2025. My husband just got back on night shift yesterday, and we now own a home in a nicer neighborhood with a solid security system, but I'm always on edge, hoping that I never run into that weird stalker guy again. During my 7th grade year of middle school, there was a girl in my class who suddenly took a liking to me. We'll call her Stacy. It was obvious that she liked me, but I didn't care too much about it, especially since at the time it didn't really bother me. A couple of weeks passed and she had made it readily apparent that she had a crush on me. I was at home in my basement when I got a text on my phone. It was from a random number that I had never seen before. And even weirder, I had never given out my iCloud account to anyone from school, and the email itself was random enough that no one could have guessed what it was. I didn't have a phone number at the time. Anyways, a couple of minutes later, I eventually found out that it was Stacy texting me. I entertained the conversation because I didn't want to be mean and just ignore her, and she started texting me every day like clockwork. At the time, I had a crush on this girl, Amanda, and the Halloween dance was coming up. And about a week before the dance, I got a text from Stacy. In this text thread, she finally confessed her feelings for me. I told her that I didn't return those feelings and that I was sorry, trying to be as respectful as possible. Stacy then texted me back, saying she knew that it was a long shot that I'd like her back because she already knew who I liked. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, what? How does she know that? So I asked, how do you know who I like? And she told me, Amanda, and said that her friend had told her. The friend she mentioned just happened to be dating my friend, the same friend that I had confided in about my crush. I asked, did my friend tell you about who I liked? And she replied yes, and I was pretty angry. The next day I confronted my friend, and he swore that he hadn't told anyone. I trusted him, and later that night I confronted Stacy, and she admitted that she had lied. She figured out who I liked just by staring at me so much. I didn't even know what to say other than yelling at her to stop talking to me. Fast forward to that summer, and she was still texting me every day, telling me how she needed to get over me. And I mean every day. For about 2 weeks, I kept telling her that she would find someone else who liked her and cared for her, and that I just wasn't the one. And eventually I got tired of it and told her that if she was really going to get over me, she needed to stop talking to me. And she got angry, and I told her to stop contacting me. And I thought that was it. But I was so wrong, as the worst was yet to come. Fast forward to my birthday in 8th grade, I thought everything had blown over by then. Half a year had passed, and I had put it all behind me. That morning I got to school and saw that Stacy had taped a drawing to my locker wishing me a happy birthday. I took the drawing off, shoved it into my locker, and completely forgot about it for the rest of the day. That night, when my friends were over, Stacy texted me and asked why I didn't say thank you for the drawing. I apologized, saying that I had a lot going on that day, and she accepted it and thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to multiple texts from her, telling me how I was wrong for not saying thank you. And at that point, I had finally had enough and just blocked her. Near the end of the school year, we were assigned an essay about a lesson that we had learned in life. It was a pretty easy assignment, until I realized that we had to present it in front of the whole class. My school was small, with only about 40 kids per grade, and each grade was split into 2 sections, so it wasn't the worst thing to present in front of everyone. Until it was. The day arrived when we had to present our This I Believe essays, when Stacy waddled up to the front of the class and announced that her essay title, Love is a Delicate Matter, and I thought to myself, God, what if this is about me? And it was. The entire essay, top to bottom, was about her confessing her love for me. And at the end, she completely slandered me, calling me a jerk that was never worth liking to begin with. The worst part, the way word traveled in our school, there were no secrets. Everyone had already known that she had liked me since 7th grade, and it was one of the most embarrassing moments I have ever had to sit through. Not to mention, she got a standing ovation. People were crying, and my friends were laughing their butts off. Even the teachers were laughing. I only had one thought for the rest of the day. What just happened? And I thought that this was finally the end of it. But I was wrong again. A couple of years passed and nothing crazy has happened since until my junior year. A good buddy of mine told me that he needed to talk to me about something important, and we met up in the stairwell, and he told me that Stacy had made a play about us in middle school. Yeah, a full-on play to present in front of an actual crowd. And I was baffled. The girl made her whole upbringing about a middle school crush, and it turns out they recorded the play, and I finally got to watch it this year. It was terrible, and I wanted to pull my eyes out kind of bad, and I also saved her essay. That's pretty bad too. Anyways, I just graduated, and I hope I never see this dumb bitch again. When I was in my early teens, I would ride my bicycle to Kmart to look and buy model cars and supplies. And that was my thing back then, building model cars. I can't say if I was in any real danger as per the TOU on this sub, but basically, I was stalked. And while I was deciding between the 66 Chevelle or the 85 Camaro, I saw this man, mid-30s-ish, walk past the aisle that I was in. Then he passed the same aisle from the other end. Once I made up my mind, settled on the IROC and left the aisle, he was on the far end and started walking down the parallel aisle to me. I wasn't weirded out yet, but I made a detour down another aisle to ditch him, or so I thought. I doubled back and got to the main aisle that led toward the front, toward the registers. He popped out on another aisle further up, facing me, then turned down the next one, and each time I encountered him, he smiled, making eye contact. So I put the model down, turned 180 degrees, and headed back toward the back of the store. There was a service entrance back there, so I made for that, thinking that I had lost or confused him, and I still wanted to build that Camaro, so I went back toward the front. And there he was, sitting on a bench in the lobby, still making eye contact and still smiling and waiting. At this point, the obvious answer would have been to just turn and bolt. But in an effort to keep my bike from getting stolen, I secured it to the railing inside the lobby, and I didn't want to stand still in his presence. I quickly went back into the store and zigzagged through the aisles, trying to lose him, and by now I was sufficiently freaked out but still didn't want to make a scene. Every time I made my way back out into the main aisle, there he was. I was walking at a brisk pace, and he was just casually strolling, but always in my direction. And at one point I passed the sporting goods section, so I picked up a baseball bat and started carrying it. And I passed the main aisle on purpose now, showing him my weapon. He seemed to be unfazed, just casually making his way up and down the aisles, still smiling, still making eye contact. I was just short of running now, almost back into the service department, when he gave up the subterfuge of chance encounters. He was directly following me. He wasn't at my pace, but he managed to keep up, and I gave up. I tossed the bat and made for the service desk, and a relatively stout African-American man was there, and I said, "Hey, I think this guy," throwing a thumb in his direction, "is following me. Can you call someone?" He hadn't come around the corner yet, so I never saw his reaction, but we heard a crash and heavy, fast footfalls. He had run toward the service entrance, knocking over a display on the way out. The service writer stood by with me while the police were called, and once they arrived, the police took a few statements, did a walk around, he was long gone, and then put my bike in their cruiser and drove me home. I didn't go back to Kmart on my own again until I was old enough to drive, and I still never went back for that model Camaro. When I was 18 and newly graduated, I ran into some issues with my attempts to enroll in college and also had a hard time finding a job in my area in the meantime, which led to me having to sign on at the job center. They determined that I was too shy to succeed in interviews and placed me in a group that was supposed to teach interview skills in order to fix that. The group ended up ultimately being a complete waste of time. I honestly think that they put me in the wrong group or just needed an extra member and made an excuse to throw me in to make up the numbers, but that's not really relevant to the story. And the other group members didn't do much to help with my shyness either, since they were all men who were at least 4 decades older than me and obviously didn't share any of my interests. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining the attention of the one member I wanted nothing to do with. I don't actually remember the man's name at this point, but I think it was something generic like John, so that's what I'll call him. John immediately got off on the wrong foot with the rest of the group when he interrupted the instructor during their instruction to the course to complain that him being there was useless, since he would be retiring in a few years anyway, and no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over 10 years in prison. When that didn't get him the reaction that he wanted, I assumed the rest of the group just thought that he was a weirdo or attention-seeking, and the instructor had heard similar things before from people who weren't happy about being in the course, and he waited until we had been given the paperwork to complete and then turned to the man next to him and loudly explained his prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, which he was a lying jerk and he never put a hand on her. She didn't even have any bruises on her at the trial or any evidence or bruises or other injuries before that either, but because she was a woman, the judge automatically believed her and sent him to jail. Those are his words. And this immediately set me on edge. I'm not an expert when it comes to the law, but I do watch true crime channels on YouTube, and I have never heard of a sentence of over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly never even happened or didn't leave visible injuries. Either John was lying and had severely beaten his wife to the point of putting her in the hospital, or he had been arrested on other charges and was covering up what he actually went to prison for. And I immediately decided that I wanted nothing to do with him regardless of which one it was, and would avoid interacting with him as much as possible outside of just polite hellos and passing him things if he asked. And like I said before, I didn't really interact much with the other members of the group at all because of their ages. I attended the first half of the meeting in the morning, spent the dinner break in the library while the men all snuck off to the pub, and then went home immediately after the second half was over. No one ever asked me how I spent my breaks, and since the pub and library were in opposite directions and couldn't be seen from the front of the building where the group met due to the way that the streets were arranged, there should have been no way for any of them to know where I'd been, and that made what happened next even more worrying. About halfway through the course on one particular day, I bumped into a friend during my dinner break and decided to put off visiting the library until after the course was over so I could catch up with them instead. When I finally got around to it, I spent at least a quarter of an hour there before heading to the desk to check out my books. I ended up being drawn into a conversation with the librarian who had noticed that I was checking out books related to a franchise that he also enjoyed, one that was getting a new movie the following year. There were only a handful of other people in the library, so I didn't see anything wrong with chatting with a friendly man around my age who shared my interests after 8 hours of boredom and paperwork. We had been talking for another quarter of an hour when he suddenly glanced over my shoulder, looking confused and concerned. He had just opened his mouth to say something when someone grabbed me by the shoulders. My friends and family know that I hate having my shoulders touched without warning and would never have done that to me, so I immediately knew that whoever was touching me was a stranger. I knocked their hands away while turning around and backing up into the librarian's desk. It was John. He was standing directly behind me with a huge smile on his face, and as soon as I turned around, he made a joke about knowing that he would find me there and how I practically lived in the library before chattering away as if we were close friends. I was very confused. It was obvious that he hadn't just coincidentally bumped into me from the way he was talking, but John had kept behind while the group was leaving because he had filled out his paperwork incorrectly. And as I mentioned before, you can't see the library from the building, so he shouldn't have had any way of knowing where I had gone. It had also been half an hour since I left the building, so if he had left shortly after me and simply seen me go inside while walking in the same direction, he would have come in by then. The only way it made sense for him to know to look for me there and joke that I practically lived there was if he somehow learned that I was going to the library during my dinner breaks, knew that I hadn't that day, and guessed that I wouldn't go after the meeting instead. What made this even stranger was the fact that John had never shown any interest in me during the group sessions and mostly ignored me the same way that I ignored him, unless we were forced to interact for some reason. So why he was now following me into other buildings to start conversations out of nowhere and acting like we were close was very odd. While John was still talking, the librarian leaned in and asked if I knew him. He had obviously noticed my negative reaction to being touched, and when I briefly explained the situation, the librarian politely asked John to leave me alone or leave the building. John refused and tried to insist that we were friends, completely ignoring the fact that I had just said that we weren't, and how ridiculous it would be to claim that an 18-year-old girl and a 50-something or 60-something-year-old man were friends in the first place. When the librarian asked again, outright stating that harassing other customers was not acceptable and that John would be removed if he refused to leave alone, John smiled and agreed to leave, but in the tone that you would use to humor a child. And then after walking out, he very obviously stationed himself right outside the doors waiting for me to leave as well. The librarian was clearly concerned by this and asked for the full story of what was going on. I told him, including my suspicions that John had been following me around without my knowledge to figure out that I would be there in the first place. He suggested that I stay in the library until his break so he could walk me to my bus stop to make sure John left me alone, but his break was several hours away. If I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten home in time to change and head to another meeting that I had later that evening, and since I couldn't stay, he asked me to at least come in the next time that I was there to let him know that I was safe, and he reluctantly watched me leave. John immediately stepped into my personal space when I got outside, jokingly asking what the librarian's problem was and still acting like we were friends. I tried to walk around him without answering and head to the bus station to go home, but he grabbed my arm and reminded me that there was a closer stop for our bus. When I told him that we weren't getting the same bus because I had never seen him on mine, he corrected me and stated that we both needed the number such and such bus and telling me where he lived, which in fact was on the same bus route as me. And although I was tempted to walk away and go to the station instead, or even sneakily get on a different bus and just walk the rest of the way home, it was clear that he was going to follow me. He still had a hold of my arm, refusing to let go when I tried to pull away, and there were several dark alleys along the way that I had no intention of going near while in his company. When I had agreed to go to the closer bus stop, he finally let go of me and started walking at my side, chattering like we were still good friends again. When we reached the stop, John kept walking, which seemed odd, but I hoped that my lack of response had finally made him give up and leave me alone. Or maybe he had confused that stop with another further along and I could run while his back was turned. But no such luck. As soon as he had realized that I wasn't following, he came back, frowning as if he were confused and asked, "I thought we were going for coffee together." Shocked, I bluntly told him no. He kept pushing, trying to convince me that I had agreed to go with him. When that didn't work, he switched tactics and claimed that I had mentioned wanting coffee while leaving the classroom. That was an obvious lie since I don't drink coffee and I told him so. And John's only response was to say I didn't have to get coffee and keep pushing me to go to a cafe with him. When I firmly refused, he apparently took that as me not wanting to drink in public because then he attempted to invite me to his flat. If that wasn't weird enough, he started telling me that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we got there, I wasn't to worry because that was his 18-year-old daughter. Because of course, an 18-year-old would just definitely be lounging around naked on her father's furniture in front of him, right? Other people at the stop were staring at us now, and I took the opportunity to point out that I was also 18. And I firmly told John that I didn't want to go to his flat and to leave me alone. And he completely ignored the last part and tried to claim that I was lying about my age and saying that I was at least 29, when most people at the time still mistook me for being in my early teens at first glance. At that moment, the bus arrived and I got on as quickly as possible, thinking that I would be safe. If necessary, the driver would just throw him off. But no. I sat in an aisle seat to block John from sitting next to me, but he physically shoved me across the seat, pinning me against the window so tightly I could barely move. He pressed his knees against the seat in front to make sure that I had no way to get past him unless he allowed it. And the ride felt endless. He kept touching me, trying to convince me to go to his flat, And although a few people gave me uncomfortable looks when I tried to make eye contact with some of the men, they would quickly look away or become very interested in their phones. As soon as I got home, I emailed the instructor, explained everything, and asking to switch groups. She ignored it for an entire week until I followed up, threatening to involve the police. And their solution was to tell me that I could leave the course early instead, essentially kicking me out if I were the problem. I saw John a few times after that, but fortunately he never noticed me or approached me again, and I hope it stays that way. This incident occurred over the past year, and I was so rattled by it that I hadn't gotten the chance to process it until recently. I decided to write it down, everything that happened, and I don't even use Reddit, but I knew of this subreddit. And as an 18-year-old male, I never in my life thought that I'd ever have any association with a stalker. In the media, stalker stories are always portrayed as some creepy bottom feeder becoming obsessed with a sweet but clueless girl and slowly invading every aspect of her privacy. My encounter with a stalker was far different, however, and it occurred during the first time that I was ever on my own. The incident was pretty lengthy, and as a result, this recounting of it will be as well. I'm originally from the East Coast, but I am currently a freshman attending college in Los Angeles, and due to COVID, the dorms were closed and classes were virtual, but I ended up coming to LA anyway, getting an apartment close to campus. I was really excited to move across the country, live on my own in a new city, and get a taste of adulthood for a year. I wasn't completely alone, though. I had friends from the past who also ended up in Los Angeles, and my friend Tommy was a close friend that I had made at camp years ago, and he attended another college in LA. My other friend Felix was also from the same camp, and back in the day, the three of us had been very close. Felix had decided to take the year off to make music with his friends in Los Angeles. My apartment building was only about 8 buildings down from Felix's. However, with my packed weeks and free weekends, our schedules were nearly opposite. His weekends were busy with work while he had relative freedom during the week, and as a result, I ended up growing particularly close to Tommy. We would alternate who visited whom during the 20-mile Uber ride between us, keeping this in mind. And oftentimes, Tommy and I would hang out with Felix and his other friends whenever Tommy came to my area of the city. And with all of that background, you should have a good idea of the context in which this incident happened. My apartment was about a 5-minute walk from a downtown area with restaurants, grocery stores, coffee shops, and boutiques. When I first moved in during the fall, I took advantage of the pleasant nights, so different from my home's often harsh climate, by taking long walks through the well-lit and populated streets to explore and get familiar with my new neighborhood. LA is a beautiful city with a dynamic culture and unbeatable weather, but it also has the constant and often harsh reminder of homelessness, many of whom suffer from mental illnesses and drug use and have been pretty much discarded by society. I have grown to despise the indifference that people showed toward them, avoiding their eyes at all costs as if their life depended on it. And during my first week, I was crossing a major boulevard when I noticed a man who appeared to be homeless in a wheelchair, with one of his wheels caught in a deep pothole. He wasn't making any noise, but he was flailing frantically. I was far behind him and couldn't believe that people were just walking past him, looking down at their phones as they passed by. I wasn't even going to make it across the street myself before the light changed, but I expected that surely someone would help him. Still, people passed by without acknowledging him. I was so frustrated that I ended up yelling to the people ahead of me in the crosswalk, only to get a middle finger back. I asked the man if he needed help. He didn't speak, he just kind of nodded. He was crumpled into what seemed like a wrinkled but finely made tuxedo jacket, and I could only see his frizzy blackish-gray hair thrashing in the folds of his clothing. I freed his wheel from the pothole and quickly wheeled him across the street. As I got him onto the sidewalk, he abruptly turned to me, bringing his face only inches from mine. I pulled away, both because he was way too close in the middle of a pandemic and because of his startling appearance. His skin was a deep, worn tan with sun wrinkles, like the kind that you'd see on old people at a Florida beach, forming what looked like a mask. His eyes were sunken deep into his head, completely vacant, and it didn't even feel like he was looking at me, but through me. "Get away," he growled in a voice so raspy it didn't even sound human. I just scoffed at the man and continued walking, assuming that would be the last I'd ever see of him. After all, in a city of 4 million, I pass hundreds of strangers daily whom I will never see again. And I continued with my life for some time and had forgotten about him entirely, but unfortunately, that didn't last long. I walked to the grocery store. I had to pass through an area with a lot of foot traffic. One afternoon, I spotted a man far in front of me walking oddly. It wasn't exactly a limp, it was almost as if he were drunk. As I got closer, I recognized those blank eyes and frizzy hair. There was no wheelchair in sight. Something about him raised major red flags in me. Maybe it was the vacancy in his eyes, or just some gut instinct telling me to get away. I tried to reserve judgment because I figured that he likely had a mental illness, and I was hoping to pass him quickly without acknowledgement, but as I got beside him, he stopped walking, causing me to momentarily pause, and a shiver ran down my spine. I smiled at him quickly and kept walking. After that, I saw him many more times. Every time he would turn in my direction, and I learned to ignore it and barely registered it. Eventually, he disappeared for a while, and I foolishly thought that was the last of him. Months after I stopped seeing him, Tommy was supposed to come over to my apartment. We were planning on picking up alcohol before heading to Felix's place to hang out, and as we were about to enter the liquor store, I spotted the tall man in the tuxedo jacket standing at an intersection several feet past the store. I was somewhat disappointed that he had returned, but it wasn't the end of the world, especially because I was with Tommy and had learned to ignore him. I didn't even bother explaining the situation to Tommy. We had just checked out and left the store, turning left toward a nearby intersection away from where I'd originally seen him, and guess who's standing at the crosswalk? My heart sank, knowing it would only be the three of us waiting for the cross sign to change. Tommy was talking to me, completely naive to the situation, but I could see the man beside him turn toward us. Tommy saw my face change and turned to the man. He quickly turned back to me, giving me a look after seeing the man's face, and the sign finally changed and we walked quickly across the street. Tommy continued talking to me, but at that point I was pretty rattled. Up until then, I had never had such direct, prolonged contact with a man. "Are you good?" Tommy asked me, and I explained to him that I had been seeing that man everywhere, all across my area of the city, and that every time I saw him, he'd stare at me. Tommy didn't really take me seriously and clowned on me for being so worried. We got to Felix's house, and while Tommy soon forgot about the incident as we hung out, I didn't. We all got fairly drunk, but I couldn't shake this sort of nagging sense of dread. And eventually, at around 2 a.m., Tommy took an Uber back to his apartment, and many of the guys were heading to bed. I was still quite buzzed, and for the first time, irrationally afraid to walk home that night, despite having done it dozens of times before. I tried to comfort myself by remembering that I had only ever seen him in the commercial area, not in the residential blocks around where we were. There were 2 cross streets between our buildings, and the walk usually took about 2 minutes. That night, I was particularly paranoid and hurried. The streets were nearly empty, as expected at that hour, and I passed one of the intersections, but as I approached the next one, I saw a figure sitting on the curb at the diagonal corner of the intersection ahead, and my heart started pounding, but I assured myself that it could just be a drunk college student. As I got closer, I could see the white streaks in the man's hair. And you know those moments when you see something so shocking that you get momentary tunnel vision? That was exactly what happened. Combined with my drunkenness, I almost fell over when I realized who it was. I turned around, my gut twisting as I debated sprinting back to Felix's apartment. The man lifted his head from his lap, his sunken eyes locking onto mine, empty, hollow, a pit where something human should have been. My breath hitched, and this was the first time in my life that I truly felt hunted. I edged toward the intersection, my feet betraying my hesitation, and I expected him to stay seated, but instead, he straightened up, his bony frame unfolding like something unnatural. "I've been waiting for you," he rasped, His lips curled into a grin, and in the sickly glow of the streetlights, I saw what he clutched in his dirt-crusted fingers. A used syringe. The needle was gleaming in the orange light. "You helped me once," he continued, taking a slow step forward. "It's only right I return the favor." I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my ears, and my building was just 200 feet away. If I ran now, could I make it? But if he knew where I lived, no, I couldn't risk it. My thoughts scattered as I glanced down across the street, considering a longer route, anything to lose him. The man's grip tightened around that syringe, his knuckles seemed to be whitening, and my legs tensed, but before I could move, I heard footsteps. 2 guys staggering toward the intersection from the opposite end. They were drunk, very drunk, but even in their hazy state, they noticed him, and one nudged the other one, whispering something, their eyes kind of darting between me and the man, and they weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, but so was he in his glaze. "There you guys are," I yelled, beckoning them toward me. They picked up on it immediately and yelled back, quickly passing him. As we walked away from the intersection, one of them asked if I was okay. I explained what was happening, knowing they probably wouldn't remember in the morning. And after a continuous flow of "bro," we reached the street parallel to mine. They reached their building and said goodbye, leaving me alone again, and it had to be around 3 a.m. at that point, and I was exhausted. I decided to sprint home from the other direction so I could slip into my building without seeing whether he was still there. When I reached the door, I couldn't help myself. I looked back at the intersection as I unlocked the door, and he was gone. I quickly stepped inside and locked the door behind me. As I pressed the elevator button, I anxiously watched the outside through the glass wall. I didn't feel safe until I was inside the elevator, at which point I let out the biggest sigh of relief. I never told my parents this story, and they were already nervous about me living alone so far away, and if they had known, they would have lost their minds and likely made me come home. And after that night, I stayed in my apartment for a few days, working from home instead of going out. A few days in, I realized that I was being ridiculous and left to grab a cup of coffee in town. Luckily, he wasn't there. For weeks, I continued walking through the commercial area without seeing him, and weeks turned into months and then into academic terms. I went home for winter break, and when I came back, he was still nowhere to be seen. Eventually, I assumed that he was gone. Maybe he had just wanted to scare me, and after succeeding, he moved on to another victim. Once again, I made the naive assumption that he was gone for good, and by late spring term, people had started heading home for the summer. A couple of weeks before I was set to leave LA, Tommy and I were hanging out one last time before he flew home. I had grown to appreciate Tommy's apartment. It was one of the only places that I felt entirely safe, being so far away from my neighborhood. I told him about that night, and by then, he finally believed me. On the night of the final incident, we were hanging out at his apartment, and everything was as normal as can be. Late that night, we decided to walk to a 24-hour donut shop a couple of blocks north. We got there quickly and ordered our donuts, and the shop was empty except for the 2 employees, so we were served almost immediately. And as we left, Tommy turned around and his face dropped. Tommy was the kind of guy who rarely showed fear, so when he had a look of dread, you knew that you were up Poops Creek without a paddle. I turned around in response and felt like I was going to faint. Standing under the dim light of the donut shop was the man. The same dirty flip-flops, the same wife-beater, the same torn pants pulled up to his chest, and the same tuxedo jacket. I had come to associate all of it with him. He stood there, staring at us. Not us, but me. And this time his eyes were empty. They were locked into mine like a laser, and I could see the fury behind them. Tommy and I were silent for a second, frozen. I looked at him and mouthed, "Run." In that second, we both sprinted back to his apartment at full speed. Tommy never looked back. As he fumbled to flash his keycard at the locked door, I caught a glimpse of the man's uneven gait as he sped toward us. The door unlocked and we ran into the lobby, slamming the automatically locking door behind us. We sprinted up the stairs to his floor where we finally caught our breath. Tommy had a look of pure disbelief in his eyes, and I was shaking with adrenaline. To this day, I have no clue how the man could have followed me 20 miles and known exactly where I was. The level of surveillance that would have required made me feel sick. Tommy was rattled, but he left LA the next day and I stayed for another week, but between finals and packing, I never left my apartment. I don't think I'll ever know what that man wanted or why he harassed me for months. By no means do I want this to deter people from helping the less fortunate, but in rare instances, good deeds can come at unknowingly dark costs. I'd like to say that I don't regret helping him, but I do. When I return to LA in the fall, I'll be in the dorms, as will Tommy. But somehow that man found me across 20 miles, so what's to say that he won't find me again just a few hundred feet from my old apartment? I can't call the police. What would I even say? He never technically did anything wrong, and LA is full of vagrants far outside the concern of law enforcement. And I won't tell my parents either, they'd probably kill me for keeping this from them all year. All I can do is wonder what will happen this fall, and I guess only time will tell. So this was 3 years ago, right before the pandemic hit, and now one of my favorite stories to tell, now that I'm no longer scared. I've moved 1,000 miles away and a few years' time has passed. So my husband was in the military during this time and I was a housewife due to work being hard for me to get in my area that I was in, as I can't drive and lived off base. Well, any military person knows that a military schedule is pretty darn predictable, and much of our lives ran on an easy-to-memorize routine. And to make matters worse, my husband was often gone for long hours. For about 2 to 3 months, I had been seeing this guy wandering around my home, peeking in windows. Honestly, I didn't originally think much of it beyond being weirded out. We didn't have anything that would interest a robber. No TV, a single 7-year-old computer, a broken couch and table, and a mattress on the floor. Literally nothing expensive in our home beyond a gun that was locked up in a safe that might have looked like it had valuables. But that's a lot of work for what looked like a home of people living in poverty, so I didn't think anything of it. Yet he kept coming back when my husband was gone. I'd seen him every few days or hear him due to my normally super sweet cat at the time hating him, hissing and yowling when he saw him. So I'd know that he was there when I'd hear my cat making an angry fuss. Well, one day I went out with my husband and I guess I didn't lock the door properly or something, as our lock could be a bit finicky and I was running late. According to our normal schedule, I would have gone to base with my husband for a family mandatory fun event and came back home alone in an Uber while my husband stayed at the base to work or hang out with his friends. And what ended up happening was that I fell sick with a migraine. I have hemiplegic migraines, so it can actually be pretty serious, and his sergeant told him to take me home and take care of me when he saw me. Now, before I go on, I should probably describe my old home. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment complex in the mountains. It was a massive complex. My home layout was this. My front door led to my kitchen and dining area, and the wall next to my door had another glass door, think a patio, and across from my kitchen was my room. Then you go down the hall and hit the living room, which had another glass door wall next to the fireplace. And finally after that, you go across the living room at the end of the hall and reach our guest room, or my plant room / cat's playroom / guest room, which had yet another glass door. I was literally surrounded by giant glass doors. And outside we had a porch, and on the porch was a storage closet where I usually kept my bike since I couldn't drive due to my migraines and seizures. Now back to the story, now that I've set the scene. When my husband brought me home, again not per our normal schedule, we arrived to find our door slightly ajar. We gave each other a look and went inside anyway, with me mumbling that I must not have locked it properly due to being in a rush that morning. We walked into the kitchen where my husband immediately went to the fridge, looking around for water for himself and me. He then spoke for the first time in the fridge. Honestly, I don't even remember what he said, but a few seconds after he spoke, we heard something. Our porch glass door at the back of our home moved, and we both knew that sound really well since I like to sit on the porch reading for hours, so I was always coming in and out. He grabbed my shoulder and whispered for me to grab his gun from our room, He then grabbed a knife and went toward the living room. I went and grabbed the gun, noticing on my way into our room that our living room glass porch door was wide open. And upon giving my husband the gun and following behind him, I dialed 911 in my panic, saying I had an active break-in. While my husband did a sweep of our home, I walked back down the hall toward the kitchen to see if the intruder had gone around the back to the front, the only way out of the area he went. We lived on a literal mountainside, and one side was blocked off out back. As I was on the phone, I suddenly heard our storage door out back, which we had forgotten to shut, slam open, and my husband and I ran outside where we found the storage door swinging open and just barely saw the same guy who had been spying on me and our home. He didn't come back that day, and I also later found out that the only things missing were some of my clothes, my lingerie, and bathroom care products. The police showed up 4 hours later and took statements from me and my husband. Eventually, my husband had to return to his normal schedule. I was terrified and he didn't like it, but we had no choice until we could find a new place in 3 months when our contract ended. The first week things were fine. This guy didn't come back and my cat didn't yowl or throw any fits, so we didn't see him either, and things were fine that week. Then another week went by and I started to think maybe the gun that we bought scared him off. But no. That third week he ended up coming back while my husband was at work in the morning. He first tried the door, attempting to force it open, and then started banging on the glass next to the door. I put 911 on speaker and texted my husband while I panicked and cried. While I was on the 911 call, he ended up leaving through the front door, giving up, I guess. And when I told the 911 dispatcher that he had walked away from the door, the lady spoke to me like I was being ridiculous or freaking out this badly over someone trying to break into my locked door. I hung up and finally called my husband while having a full-on panic attack. It turns out he was already coming home with a car full of his and my friends, all of whom were in the army and worked with him. They had turned around toward me as soon as I texted what was going on. The intruder ended up going to the back door and trying both glass doors there as well before finally giving up. About 4 minutes later, my husband and his friends arrived and found me clutching my cat and crying, and they scanned the area but still didn't find him. The cops showed up 7 hours later, and I, now very angry, gave another report. I ended up having 3 of my husband's friends sleep over in the spare room, and my husband and I slept in our now locked and bolted bedroom. I had a lock installed on the bedroom door after the first time. The next day, my husband's friends went out and got cameras, installing them at all of our door and window areas. And after this last time, beyond him looking in our windows 3 more times, I never had another issue with this weirdo until I moved out shortly after, and since then, I've never seen him again. It was the month of January, and I had just gotten done with my exams at college. I'm 21, and being in a long-distance relationship, I hadn't seen my boyfriend in over 3 months. Since I had some free time, my boyfriend and I planned this getaway trip to the mountains as it was the prime time to experience the snow. Although this meant that I would have to fly out to a city, I've never been there before, so I was skeptical at first because this trip had to be kept a secret from my very conservative parents, not approving me having a boyfriend, let alone traveling with him. But we were together for 5 years, so I was determined to go. All of my friends knew about this trip and had all the required details. Now fast forward to the day of my flight, I was seated in the window seat next to the fairly older guy, probably in his late 30s. I was on my phone and so was he. He was texting someone back and forth, and I remember thinking how annoying his phone's notification ring was. He gave me a very weird vibe the moment that he sat next to me, and I shrugged it off as I thought that it was just prejudice against him. As the flight took off, I noticed that no one occupied the aisle seat beside him, and I wondered why he wasn't moving up there. 1, naturally anyone, whether me or him, would prefer some privacy, and 2, in our country, men usually shift or make space for a woman in public settings. The man remained glued to his seat, and I could feel his eyes on me as I looked out the window. Some time passed, and he started making small talk, questioning me. "Where are you from? Do you live in the city you're flying to? How old are you? Is your friend coming to pick you up from the airport? And I could start to feel the creepy vibes oozing from his sinister expressions, and I knew that I had to be smart enough to not share any personal information. I lied and told him that I lived in the city that I was flying to, hoping to prevent any chance of him trying to mislead me. I avoided eye contact and kept my focus on my phone for a long time. He tried to put on a nice guy act, telling me about his job and travel plans for the upcoming weekend, but by this point, I wasn't even responding. I could physically feel him inching closer to me. I was a little freaked out, but I thought that I could handle it for another 20 minutes until the flight landed. At this point, the overhead lights were dimmed, as it was a night flight, and at that exact moment, I swear that creep grinned and relaxed before staring down at me like we were in love or something. I backed up against the window and started clicking photos of the view outside. Then this creep says, "You're so cute. Do you think I could get your number?" And I froze. He was inches from my face. "No, that's weird," I replied, trying not to sound too angry, and who knew if he was a psycho. "Give me your Instagram then." At that moment, I knew he wouldn't stop. "No, I have a boyfriend. Stop," I said sternly, and he stared at me without blinking, then put on the nice guy mask again and offered me a bottle of water. I was relieved when the flight attendant announced that we were about to land. I would finally be away from this weirdo. But then he extended his hand toward me and whispered, "Can I hold your hand?" I panicked. I thought for sure that he was going to touch me. "What? No. Are you mad?" I managed to half scream, and he just gave me this blank look and asked, "Why?" I kept quiet, internally praying for him to leave me the hell alone. The flight finally landed, and I hurried to grab my stuff and get out of there. And as I glanced back a few times, I saw him pointing toward me and whispering to his friends, who were smiling and staring at me. I quickened my pace towards baggage claim, and so did he and his friends. Frantically, I started texting my boyfriend, who told me to stay calm and get out of the airport as quickly as possible without letting them catch up to me. I grabbed my bags and rushed out of the terminal, relieved to finally be free. But just moments later, I felt someone begin to touch my hair. I turned around. He was standing right behind me, grinning like some maniac. My heart pounded so hard that I thought it would jump out of my chest. "Do you need a ride home? We could take you. Don't hesitate too much." Without a word, I grabbed my bags and walked straight toward a family with kids, asking if they could accompany me to the parking lot where my Uber was waiting. I quickly explained the situation and how this weirdo wouldn't leave me alone. They kindly stayed with me until I got into my Uber, and I thanked them profusely. And as my Uber pulled away, I saw him still staring at me with those cold and sunken-in cheeks. Thankfully, he didn't follow me from there. And I finally reached my boyfriend safely, and the rest of the trip went smoothly, and I didn't think much about the incident. It had become just some blur. But a few months later, while scrolling through Instagram, I got a new follower request and opened it, and my heart dropped. It was him. Somehow, he was able to find my Instagram, and his message popped up asking, "Remember me?" I blocked him immediately, and then I deleted my Instagram and haven't been back on there since. So this has been going on since I was a freshman in high school. I'm currently a senior. My freshman year, I moved schools and started hanging out with a new friend group. 2 friends from that group already lived in my neighborhood, so we usually all just hang out at my house. Whenever we decided to go to my other friend's house, we'd usually just walk since it was close. Those friends were just renting their house at the time, so eventually they sold it and bought a house in the same neighborhood. When they moved in, we started hanging out there a lot since they had a huge garage in their backyard where we could chill without being bothered too much. And we eventually got tired of walking all the way over there since it was on the complete opposite side of the neighborhood, and since we couldn't drive, we started taking a shortcut. There was a path through someone's lawn on my side of the neighborhood, so we started cutting through their yard during the day. My friend said that at one point, they talked to the owners while they were outside, and they said they didn't mind us walking through their yard as long as we didn't wake them up. They even turned off their motion sensor lights so we could cut through at night without causing a commotion. And all was well for a couple of weeks until we noticed that the man in the house across the street would always be outside with a cigarette, taking pictures of us when we walked up the road. And this went on for a good year or two. We told my parents, but just tried to ignore it altogether since it creeped us out. And the creepiest part was that no matter what time we went through, he was always out there watching and snapping pictures of us. It didn't matter if it was 3 p.m. or 3 a.m., he was always lurking in the shadows of his porch with that cigarette ready to snap a picture. Now fast forward to my junior year, my friend was house-sitting for his parents while we were on vacation. We were all staying over there and decided to run over to my house for food. And on the way over, I spotted the cigarette and pointed it out to my friend. Mind you, it was 2:30 a.m. and we could feel this dude staring at us. We started to crap bricks and walked faster and faster until we got off that road. When we got back to my house, we both felt really uneasy, so we grabbed a couple of knives and a can of mace before heading back with snacks. I also decided to grab flashlights since it was especially dark that night, and as soon as we got close to the house again, I got that same eerie feeling. I saw what looked like a person crouched behind a bush in the front yard. I lit the bush up with my flashlight and immediately saw a shadow darting back behind a tree. We started walking faster and kept looking back every few seconds, and that's when I saw a silhouette of legs standing perfectly still on the other side of the camper in their driveway. I absolutely pooped my pants and sprinted through the shortcut into my friend's back door. I don't know what this guy's intentions are, but they definitely don't seem good. And even now, whenever we walk through there, he's always outside watching. And since then, one very strange thing has happened. I don't know if it was the same guy, but it very well could have been. One night, we were walking my friend home in my neighborhood and decided to take the long way back to my house to avoid that creepy guy again. We dropped him off and all was well, until we started walking back. It was me and 3 other friends. We were almost at the end of the road near the stop sign when a white truck flew up to us, rolled down the window, and started barking questions at us. I tried to remain calm and ask him if there was some problem. He said that someone in a blue hoodie had walked onto his back porch and was banging on the glass door. One of my friends was wearing a white hoodie, by the way, but still, this guy started accusing him of doing it, even though we hadn't gone on anyone's porch at all. He demanded our names, so I just gave him my first name and nothing else. The entire time he had his hand on his hip, looking like he was about to burst a blood vessel in his head. He was so angry. We told him that we were on the complete opposite side of the neighborhood when it happened, but he didn't buy it, and he got angry and just screamed at us, "Don't you boys know it's dangerous to be out here at this time?" And I just said, "Now I do." And he pretended to drive off, but as we started walking back, he began following us in his car. For the entire 20-minute walk back, this creepy weirdo trailed us about 100 feet behind in his truck, matching our pace. And he followed us down 3 turns all the way to my house, and the moment he saw us go inside, he speeds off. I didn't wake my parents, which was stupid, and in hindsight, I definitely should have, so they could have gone outside and asked this weirdo what in God's name he was doing, harassing us alone at 2 a.m. and stalking us back to my house. I don't know if it was the same guy since he claimed his house was in a different side of the neighborhood, but he could have been lying. Anyone unhinged enough to follow some kids home like that can't be taken seriously. Howard was a senior in my team, and one day during chit-chat he asked me to recommend some colognes to him as I know a lot about perfumes and fragrances. I recommended some and then he asked me to help him buy it. I suggested that it's better to try colognes in person before buying, but he insisted multiple times that I buy my recommendation for him, and so eventually I did. After purchasing it, I WhatsApped him the receipt and he texted back, "Thanks, I'll treat it as a gift from you, lol." He did pay me back later, so I assumed he was joking. The manager of my previous team, Alfred, asked me to grab a drink after work one day as he noticed that I had been frustrated at work lately. He also said that I can invite more people if I wanted to, and so I invited Kate, my closest friend in the company, who was also on Alfred's team. Kate suggested that I invite one more colleague as she believed that it was better to hang out in a group of 4. I thought for a bit and invited Howard as he had worked under Alfred before, and I told Howard that Alfred wanted to buy all of us drinks. I regularly have drinks with Kate and another colleague, Aiden, after work, so this was the first time that I hung out with either Alfred or Howard. After the drinks, we decided to take the last scheduled subway home. Only Howard and I lived in the same direction, and from the previous chit-chat, I knew that he lived near stop A, which was 10 stops before mine. I lived quite far from the subway, a 1-hour walking distance, so I planned to take a taxi after getting off at my stop. After we got on the subway, Howard started saying things that made me feel uncomfortable. For instance, he asked when he could become as close to me as Aiden, or whether Aiden had ever been to my apartment. To be honest, I wasn't even that close with Aiden. We were more like work friends, and I was annoyed by all those weird questions, but I thought to myself, it's just a few more stops until stop A, and I'll have my peace soon. Howard didn't get off at stop A, though. I asked him about it, to which he replied that he had some errands to run near stop B the next morning, so he'd be staying at a friend's place near stop B, and stop B was just 1 stop before mine. Luckily, Howard shut up soon, probably because of my lack of response, so I just looked at my phone in silence, and I only noticed that he was still there when I was about to get off at my stop. He followed me off the subway and ordered to take a taxi together. He said that he'd drop me off at my place and then go to his friend's, which made no sense since those 2 drop-off points were in completely opposite directions from my subway stop, so I declined by saying that I planned to walk home. He didn't know where I lived, and then he offered to walk me home. I told him it was an hour away and persuaded him to just get a taxi outside the subway stop, and he finally budged and called a taxi through the app, which showed the estimated fare. I overheard him murmuring the amount, and it was definitely more than the fare from the subway stop to stop B, more like the fare to stop A, and I suspected the staying at a friend's place excuse had been a lie all along just to follow me home. A week later, Kate told me that she overheard Howard insinuating to Alfred that they were in a relationship. We worked in a profession where relationships between staff had to be reported and spouses couldn't work in the same team. And I was creeped out by Howard, but didn't bring it up to Alfred since he didn't ask me about it either. And a month later, Alfred invited his team and several other colleagues that he had previously worked with to dinner to celebrate the end of a project. After the meal, Alfred asked me where I was heading, as he knew that I had 2 apartments. Kate and Howard were walking with us. I told Alfred that I was going back to the apartment in the same direction as Kate's, which was in the opposite direction of Howard's. And Howard then joined the conversation and said that he was going that way too because a friend was hosting a party there. And Kate and I were very skeptical. On the subway, Kate asked him where the party was, and Howard replied, "Stop C," which happened to be my stop. So Kate and I pretended that we had other plans and that I wasn't getting off at stop C. And Howard eventually got off at stop C, and I rode with Kate to her stop before getting on another subway back to my stop. I avoided him as much as possible until I eventually quit that job. My name is Ellie, and I'm 24 from Topeka, Kansas. I want to tell you about the single worst thing that's ever happened to me. I've been a fan of your channel for a long time, and I'd always hoped that nothing worth writing to you about would ever actually happen to me, but it seems my luck has finally run out. But I don't want to just share my story with you, I actually need your help, and by the end of my story, I think you'll understand why. It all started around 18 months ago, which right now feels like a whole entire lifetime ago. I first encountered him, or at least I think I first encountered him at the diner where I used to work. I was a waitress, the kind who smiles at everyone, even the weirdos. And while he was one of those quiet types, tall, thin, with greasy black hair that hung over his eyes, all mumbles and no eye contact. At least at first, anyway. I remember he wore a gray hoodie most days, stained at the sleeves like he hadn't washed it in quite a while, and then he'd sit in the corner booth for hours on end, just kind of nursing some black coffee, but it was only ever a black coffee. And I didn't think much of him at first. People come and people go, but this particular guy just sort of kept staring at me. Not in a flirty sort of notice me way either. His eyes were cold, like he was studying me or maybe even sizing me up. Then came the night that I caught him watching me through the window as I locked up, and I told myself that it was nothing, just some weirdo lonely guy who thought that I was pretty and hadn't been taught that it was rude to stare. But it wasn't long before things started to get really creepy. About a week later, I found a note slipped under my front door. It was sort of scrawled on a torn piece of notebook paper, and it said, "You look pretty in blue today." My work uniform wasn't blue, not at all, but what had actually been blue were the underwear that I'd been wearing that day. And in that moment, my stomach dropped. I lived alone. No one was supposed to know what I was wearing underneath, and my uniform didn't show anything off either. I checked the locks, the windows, and everything seemed fine. I threw the note away and told myself that it was nothing, maybe a prank, possibly by some local kids, I guess. And I tried to reassure myself with stuff like that, but it didn't work, and I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. And things got way, way worse over the weeks that followed. I started seeing the guy everywhere. Not up close, just glimpses here and there at a distance. A shadow across the street when I walked home. A figure standing under the streetlight outside my house at night, but I really never knew. I didn't always see his face, but it really felt like it was him. Once, I swore that I saw him in the grocery store 2 aisles over peeking through the cereal boxes, and I turned to look, and he was already gone. I knew that I was probably being paranoid and that I was imagining things. Overworked, overstressed, no sleep, all that kind of stuff. But the notes kept coming. And it would say stuff like, "I like your hair down. You shouldn't leave your curtains open." And, "I'm closer than you think." Each note, in this childlike handwriting of his, it made my skin crawl a little more each time I got one. And on the advice of a friend, I stopped throwing them away, and instead kept them in a shoebox as proof that something was very, very wrong. I prayed things would get better, that he'd get bored of me, but the situation got even worse as time went by. I'd hear footsteps behind me on my way home from work, but when I turned, no one was there. My trash cans started getting knocked over, and once I found a dead bird on my porch. Its little neck had been snapped and its feathers were all over the steps where somebody had apparently been ripping them out. And the notes get even creepier too. "I can hear you breathing at night," or "You can't hide from me." And I almost stopped sleeping altogether. I'd sit up with the lights on, just clutching my knife, waiting for something to happen, and I knew that he was out there, watching and getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before he made his move on me. But in the end, I couldn't take it anymore and told my neighbor, Tom, about it. Now, he's an older guy, Tom. Pretty sure he's in his 50s, with a very kind face, big belly, and a loud laugh. And he lived across the street from me, and we'd always wave to each other. One afternoon, I knocked on his door, pretty much shaking at that point, and just spilled my guts about everything that had been happening. The notes, the footprints, that sickening feeling of being hunted. And I told him how scared I was, that the whole thing seemed to be getting worse and worse with each passing day, and that I was scared that the guy stalking me was going to actually end up hurting me. I remember him frowning, putting a hand on my shoulder, and told me that I wasn't alone. "You see anything weird? You call me, okay?" he told me. "Day or night, I'll come running." I nodded, grateful for the offer of help that I don't think I can even put into words. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I actually had someone on my side. But the stalking didn't stop, and the notes slowly turned into what I perceived to be threats. "I'll cut your pretty throat. No one can save you. I'm coming for you soon," it would say. I stopped going outside unless I had to, and I checked the locks 10 times a night sometimes. And then one night, He made everything fall apart. I was in my kitchen, making tea to calm my nerves when I saw him. A figure walking up my driveway. Tall, thin, moving very slowly like he didn't care if I actually saw him. And that was like his signature, I guess, how I'd always know that it was him. My heart stopped in my chest. This was it. He was actually here to kill me. Obviously, I finally ran to the phone and dialed 911. I told them that someone's trying to break into my house. My voice was shaky and I tried to whisper, "Please hurry." The operator told me to stay calm and told me that help was on the way. But all the same, I grabbed my cell phone and called Tom, my neighbor. It rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. And I remember thinking, come on. But I still got nothing. No answer, no voicemail, no nothing. I hung up, and there was panic starting to rise up inside my chest because I knew the cops wouldn't get there in time, and I was completely and totally on my own. I had a gun, a little handgun my dad gave me when I moved out, and I've never used it, but I kept it loaded on my nightstand. I grabbed it, my hand trembling, and crept to the top of the stairs. The house was quiet, but I could feel him out there waiting. I crouched in the dark, gun just pointed at the front door, praying that the cops would show up first. And these minutes dragged by. My palms were sweaty, slipping on the grip of the gun, and then out of nowhere, bam! The door flew open, kicked hard, splintering the frame before a shadow stepped inside very quickly. And in that moment, I didn't think. I just screamed and pulled the trigger. 3 shots, loud and sharp, making my ears ring. This person grunted and fell, sprawled on the floor. I dropped the gun, and I was shaking like I'd never before in my entire life before I stumbled down the stairs. The lights were off, and I could see blood pooling on the hardwood floor, and there was lots of it too. I flipped the switch, feeling this sick kind of relief and knowing that my problems were about to be buried 6 feet deep. But when I flicked that light switch on, my entire world had fell apart. It wasn't the stalker lying there, bleeding out in my hallway. It was my neighbor, Tom. His kind face was pale, his chest torn open from the bullets, and he'd been holding a flashlight, not even a weapon. And I remember sobbing before falling to my knees. I cried out that I was sorry, that I didn't know, and he was just wheezing, blood bubbling at his lips as he struggled to breathe, and then he just went still. I pressed my hands to his chest trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too late, and he died right there. And when the police arrived minutes later, I was still screaming, covered in Tom's blood, trying to revive him before they pulled me off. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but I already knew that there was no saving him. After I explained everything that had happened, the cops put me in handcuffs and took me to their station, and I told them everything. About that stalker, about the notes and the threats. I showed them the shoebox full of all of this evidence and felt totally vindicated in doing so too, because it all made keeping that box of cursed paper finally worth it. I told them that I thought my stalker was at the door, that he'd come to kill me, and that I didn't think Tom had seen my calls, let alone piece together what was happening. They listened and wrote it all down, but then instead of being sympathetic, their face was very cold, like they didn't believe me. They later told me at around 3 a.m. that Tom died on the operating table, and all I could do was sit there in that cold interrogation room, feeling completely numb, and then I cried until I couldn't anymore. The police searched my house, my yard, the whole neighborhood. They looked into the stalker, asked me for his name, description, really anything, and I told them what I knew, that he was tall and thin with greasy hair and a gray hoodie. And they checked the diner's security footage, asking my coworkers about him, but no one but me could remember seeing this guy or really have any inclination as to who he was. They went through the notes, the footprints, the dead bird, but when they came back, they said that the handwriting on the notes matched my handwriting. The footprints matched my own boots, And as for that bird, they said that I could have just done it myself. There's no evidence of anyone else, they told me. Just you. And they sent me to a psychiatrist. She's been a stern woman with glasses, scribbling notes while I talked. I told her that I wasn't crazy, that my stalker was real, and that he'd been after me for months on end. She'd asked about my life, my job, and my family, if I was lonely. I said I was fine, that I was just scared, but she didn't believe me either. And then after days of tests, they decided that I really was crazy. Delusional, they called it, unfit to stand trial. And they said that I made my stalker up, that the stress of living alone and working almost constantly broke me down, shattered my mind, and turned me into what became a killer. They then locked me in some psych ward instead of a jail, a place with white walls, padded doors, and nurses who now look at me like I'm some kind of monster. But I'm not crazy. My stalker was real. I've seen him with my own eyes. I felt him watching me. The notes, the threats, they weren't in my head. They couldn't have been. I didn't kill Tom on purpose. I swear to Jesus Christ in heaven that I thought that he was my stalker come to finally kill me, or worse. I thought killing him meant saving myself. But now he's dead and I'm trapped here, either drugged up or tied down and watched every second. And they won't listen. None of them will ever listen. And they think I'm a liar, a murderer, a lunatic, but I know that you'll believe me. Your audience. You wouldn't have gotten this far if you didn't, right? So please, I'm begging you to believe me, and I'm begging you and everyone who listens to you to help me. Find him, that man in the gray hoodie, because he's still out there. I know it. He's watching, waiting for the next girl whose life he's going to ruin. I'm not insane. I didn't just imagine him, and if you don't help me, he'll keep going, and no one will stop him. Search for those notes, the footprints, anything, and prove that I'm telling the truth. If you can get this to your audience and get me out of here, I will be infinitely grateful. Otherwise, I feel like I'm going to be buried in here forever. In 1988, I was 8 years old, a Mexican-American spending the summer in Mexico. My dad had warned me since childhood that it was dangerous to be out in the fields or graveyards alone, especially at night. I grew up with a fear that magic was real and alive in Mexico, particularly out in the countryside. That night, it was dark out. No electricity, only oil lamps, and I didn't know how to work one. So I just sat on the front porch in the moonlight, listening to the bugs. They were louder than usual. And then, I heard footsteps. More than one person very close. There was no way that I could have missed them when they were further away. I looked around, beginning to panic. I didn't hear any voices or any banter, just shuffling. And it got louder and it sounded like a mob. I jumped up and ran inside, tripping a few times, psyching myself out like I was suddenly in a horror movie where every stumble meant certain death. I slammed the door shut and locked it, grabbed the fireplace poker lying next to the doorway and ran into my room. No lock on that door. My window faced the moon, lighting up the room enough for my eyes to adjust. And I stood there, poker held short like a baseball bat, staring at the door for a long time. But there was nothing, and the silence made me feel slightly at ease. I walked over to my bed, about to let myself fall into it, when I glanced at the window at the last moment. There, draped in a headscarf, peering in, was a woman. I landed on my bed with a jolt, feeling suddenly vulnerable, and my grip loosened on the poker, and she was still staring at me. Then she started showing her teeth, but she wasn't smiling. My God. Then a bearded man appeared from the other side, whispering something to her. He noticed her staring into the window, then turned and saw me, and his face changed. He bared his teeth too. What were wrong with these people? Too scared to shout, I stayed frozen. Everyone in the house was still asleep, and the man lifted his hand and started pressing against the window, inspecting it. He tapped on the glass, lightly at first, and then harder, and it looked like he was about to open it. What do I do? Holding my breath, I just waited. If he broke the window, I was done for. I felt like they were about to drag me by my ankles all the way to hell. And then, common sense kicked in. I remembered the poker. I grabbed it and ran to the window, swinging as hard as I could. And that poker smashed against the pane closest to the man and the glass shattered. And I instinctively squeezed my eyes shut from the shards and noise. And when I opened them again, I could hear them running away. The wind was blowing through the broken window, and there were crickets outside as well. The lights flicked on in the house. My dad and uncle rushed into my room asking what I'd been doing, and then they saw the broken window. My dad flipped out, started shouting, and asked me what the hell I was thinking, and all I could say in English was, "There were people outside. They were staring at me." And his eyes immediately went wide, and he shut up. My uncle looked confused. He didn't speak English, and my dad grabbed me by the elbow and barked at my uncle to wake everyone up and get them into the kitchen. My uncle started shouting, telling everyone to hurry, and of the 10 family members, 6 ended up in the kitchen. The other 4, my dad, uncle, and 2 older cousins, went outside armed with a hunting rifle, an old service revolver, and a couple of shovels. They were gone for maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like eternity. Inside, I tried explaining to my mom and the other women what had happened, and gossip started. My aunt started stirring things up and smirked and told the kids that it was La Llorona and her husband, and that freaked me and my younger cousin out. Mom and my other aunt shut her down, saying that she was being ridiculous, and then the men came back and nothing, and they'd check again in the morning. Nothing was stolen, no cars, no tools, no chickens. We all just decided to stay up, and there was no way anyone was sleeping after all of that. Coffee and bread went around as we sat together, just throwing out theories. Thieves, spies, La Llorona, stalkers, even skinwalkers came up. At sunrise, the whole family went outside to check things over. There was blood right outside my window, and my uncle had missed it in the dark, and my mom was audibly worried. The rest of the day passed without incident, and we stayed for a few nights, but my uncle, cousin, and dad took turns standing guard. On our last night there, someone brought a newspaper from the nearest larger town over, and it warned country folk about these roving bands of hyper-poor people breaking into barns and farmhouses, killing the owners and stealing whatever they could carry before disappearing back into the hills. 12 people had already been killed, apparently. Only one survivor, a farmhand who managed to shoot an intruder and drag himself to town, had lived long enough to tell what had happened, and the town's terrible doctor unfortunately couldn't save him. And my dad's face was grim. That's who they were, he said. Years later, I asked what he had told my uncle that night, and his answer chilled me. I told him I saw gitanos, and my uncle instantly knew what to do. I looked it up later, and I guess gitanos in English means gypsies.